recording. Hi, hello.
We're back.
You can dock our pay this week, sir.
I plan to give you just as much as I gave you the last week. Don't worry.
Well, thank you.
Okay, so but God rewards. So, but thank God.
Oh, man.
Okay, so we left off after the first four verses of chapter 11. As I mentioned, chapter 11 can be divided into several chapters. You know, being appended back to chapter 10 and forward to chapter 12. So we're going to try to get through at least most of 11. Possibly we might finish the entire book today. Um, so okay, so between here and verse let's see. Okay, so we're at verse 5 and well, let's read all the way to verse 12.
I'm sorry, late rabbinical greeting, uncles and aunts, and dads as usual.
Oh, okay, well, very nice. Okay. Okay, so I'm doing the Hebrew this time. Ernestine is doing the English from our scroll, and Russell and Teresa will I guess arm wrestle to find out who gets to do the translation of the commentary. Now we're probably not going to do as many commentaries as we did before, um, because since as we started last week, these last three chapters of Daniel is one conversation on one day that Daniel had these three chapters of prophecy. So therefore, to understand in context, we should try to get through it in one reading. But there is a couple verses that we have to expand and comment on and stuff like that. So, but okay, so the general gist is that we're talking about either the Greek or Roman Empire in most of these verses, at least between here and chapter and verse 12. Okay, so here I'll start with the Hebrew. Verse 5 in Daniel chapter 11. V'chazak melech hanegev umin tzara v'yachazak alav u'mashal mimshal rav memshalto. Lekit shanim chabaru uvas melech hanegev tavo el melech hatzafon lasos meisharim lo sa'atzor. Koach hazroa v'lo yamod uzro. V'sinasen hi umavi'eha v'hayolda umachazika ba'itim. Vaman minetzer shorasheha kano v'yavo el hachayil v'yavo b'ma'oz melech hatzafon v'aso v'hem v'chazik. Gam Elohehem im nesichehem im kulei chemdasam kesef v'zahav b'shvi yavi mitzrayim. V'hu shanim yamod mimelech hatzafon uva b'malchus melech hanegev v'shav el admaso ובבניו יסגרו, ואספו המון חיילים רבים ובאו ושטף ועבר וישוב ויסגר עד מעוזו. ויסמרמר מלך הנגב ויצא ונלחם עמו עם מלך הצפון. והעמיד המון רב וניתן המון בידו. ניסה המון ורם לבבו והפיל ריבos ולא יעוז. Okay, please translate the first, let's see, verses 5 through 12. That is Ernestine.
The king of the south will grow stronger than his enemy and his nobles, and he will overpower him and rule. His dominion will be a great dominion. At the end of many years, they will join together, and the daughter of the king of the south will come to the king of the north to establish uprightness. But she will not restrain the power of the strong arm, nor will the king nor his arm withstand. So she and those who brought her with will be surrendered, as well as the one who fathered her and he who supported her in times of need. Zion from her roots will stand firmly on his foundation. He will confront the army of and enter the stronghold of the king of the north. He will succeed against them and overpower. Also, he will bring their gods and their princes with their precious vessels of gold, of silver and gold in captivity to Egypt, and he will stand secure for years against the king of the north. He will enter the kingdom of the king of the south, but he will return to his soil. Then the northern king's sons will stir themselves up and gather a multitude of great armies. He will then launch an attack, inundate, and pass through. Then he will once again stir himself up right up to the south stronghold. The king of the south will become embittered and go out and battle with him, with the king of the north. He will raise a great multitude, but that multitude will be delivered into the south's hand. Then the multitude of the north will feel uplifted, and their hearts will be proud. But although they will cut down myriads of their enemies, they will not prevail.
Thank you. Okay, so the art scroll has a running commentary. It's really fascinating if you want to just focus on the idea um of the Greeks and then eventually the Romans. So here it's talking about the difference between let's see, the king of the north here is let's see, Seleucus, Seleucus, and the south is Ptolemy. Ptolemy ruled over Egypt, but they're the remnants of the Greek Empire from the days of Alexander. As you remember from last week, this chapter started with a discussion of Alexander the Great. So here in these verses, we've been discussing the two southeastern branches of the remnant of Alexander's empire. They're going to fight with each other, and the north, the north and the south will fight each other, and eventually the north will prevail. Um, well, actually, then it's hard because if you don't look at the parentheses, you get confused which is the north, which is the south. So let's look at 12 with and without the parentheses. Without the parentheses in the Art Scroll translation, then the multitude will feel uplifted and their hearts will be proud, but although they will cut down the myriads of, they will not prevail. But it doesn't say in the text north or south, but Art Scroll puts in of the north. You understand? So that's very helpful. In verse 11, if not for the parentheses, it would be more harder to follow. Because again, Daniel was not just telling a story; he was commanded at the end of this prophecy in chapter 12 to hide, to make everything a secret and So part of his job in this prophecy was not to be precise. But anybody who knows history knows this is only talking about the Greek Empire. This part of the chapter. The second half of that chapter, that's where it becomes more complicated. And we're going to take more time to discuss alternative ideas of what it could be. So 11, the king of the south will be embittered and go out and battle with him, and the king of the north, with the king of the north. He will raise a great multitude, but the multitude will be delivered into his hand. Whose hand? So article explains the south's hand. So the north will attack. So in this case, we're talking about a northern kingdom that's successful. This is the northern kingdom that eventually the Hashmonaim, the Maccabees, would have to oppose. So in the case of the north and south, in this part of the chapter, we're talking about the southeastern empire of Greece. The Middle Eastern section will overpower the Egyptian section. And just when you're reading the Greek name in English, keep in mind that Ptolemy we don't pronounce the P. It's Ptolemy. I hope you'll tolerate if I say Ptolemy by accident. Thank you. So now, as we mentioned before, a lot of the Egyptian Grecian kings were all named Ptolemy. Sorry, Ptolemy. Ptolemy. But they had another name added to it. For example, Ptolemy Philadelphus, Ptolemy Antiochus. But let's see. Sorry, Ptolemy Philopater. Antiochus was in the north. And there were multiple Antiochuses, and one of them the Maccabees fought against. So the seat of the Assyrian Greek army was in Syria, in modern Syria, as we know it. When the Romans entered the area, they took their capital and put it in eventually in Caesarea in the Holy Land. So the Romans had a more southern base of operations than the Greeks in that area. Okay, so now it's going to be interesting. Without a chapter change, without a chapter change, the question is, are we still talking about the same kings, north and south? So since the kingdoms of the Syrian Greeks with all the Antiochuses, so they're called the kings of the north, and all the Ptolemaic kings in Egypt, they're from the south. But now it's going to get a bit more complicated. So let's read verses 13.
Wait
and
a second.
You had a question?
Yeah. Everyone is dead in Egypt today?
No. Okay, so you have to understand.
Yeah.
Okay, the ancient Egypt Empire. Okay, they were from descendants of Ham, African.
Yes.
and they had a darker complexion. Then they were replaced by the Southern Greek Empire.
Was it Hashem's will?
It's everything's Hashem's will in a sense, but God gives clear ethical boundaries. He doesn't he doesn't want anyone to die. It's in Ezekiel chapter 18. He doesn't even want the wicked to die, but there's certain rules to make sure certain things happen. So now, and eventually, of course, more in more modern times, as recent as about 1400 years ago. So then, of course, the caliphate took over a lot of these lands. Um, so there have been people moving around in those areas. But so the key thing to remember, though, and again, it's easier to follow this in context. So if we're reading the as much of the chapter as possible on the same sitting, so this is going to have a possible break from discussion of Greek times to a discussion of Roman times without a paragraph break even.
Well, I certainly hope our explanations and discussions won't mess up like before.
No, don't worry. But if you look in the English, Art School does put a separate paragraph on starting from verse 13. However, in the Hebrew, if you look on the right side of the page, on page 126, if you're using the blue edition of the Art Scroll Ezekiel, this is all one paragraph without any even extra spaces. So therefore, this is part of the secrets of the book of Daniel, is that he can often change hundreds of years later a different north and a different south. So now Art School likes the idea of just using the kingdoms of mainly the Grecian kingdoms, and later maybe discussion of Rome. Okay, but we're gonna have to take it more careful in this second half of the chapter. Okay, so let's see. Did what was the last verse we just read in class?
Oh,
Someone who's
12.
hey, Russ, Teresa, what was the last verse we just did? 12,
You
or
went
did
through
we?
12.
Okay, all right. Because when I'm preparing this, I of course I did all the verses. So
come on
so
now, you're the best. You know that,
no, well,
right?
that's that. Thank you for your unbiased opinion.
You know you're the rabbi.
Relative whom I begot.
You know you're the rabbi, though.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, right.
That's pretty good.
Was I right?
Wait. Oh yeah, I'm a rabbi. Okay, pretty good.
Sorry.
No, it's good. All right. Okay,
Let's
so
continue.
all right, I may have to ask someone again where we are. So when so I'm thinking about all the ideas of the chapter, and not necessarily what we were just doing. So I'm focused on my previous memories of this chapter, not what we just talked about necessarily, unless you just asked a question, and someone just asked a question. So okay. Anyway,
What?
you were the one that asked the question.
Yeah.
You're gonna have to consult your notes. Okay.
So where are the countries today?
They're still where they are. The question is who's in those countries at this time.
Oh, well, that's what we're gonna find out.
Right. So the north and south, which were parts of the Grecian Empire, are now different Arab countries for the most part.
Same thing with Hamas.
No, Hamas is not a real country. It's just a group of psychos banded together out of hatred.
Psychopaths who are descended from Asaph and Ishmael.
Yeah. Okay. So anyway, we're going to do now 13 and 14.
And we're gonna find out where they are.
Right. So let's do 13 and 14. ושב מלך הצפון והעמיד המון רב מן הראשון, ולקץ העתים שנים יבואו בו בחיל גדול ורכוש רב, ובעתים ההם רבים יעמדו על מלך הנגב, V'nei Paritse Amacha Yinasu Lahamid Chazon V'nich Shalu. Okay, please, Ernestine, please translate 13 and 14.
The king of the north will once again raise a multitude greater than the first. At the end of the times, several years, he will launch an attack with a great army and with vast resources. In those times, many will rise against the king of the south, and sons of the lawless men of your people will exalt themselves to establish a vision, but they will stumble.
Okay, so on verse 13, the phrase as translated at the end of the times. Let's look at the commentary. This is on page 126 in the Art Scroll. At the end of the times, if you could read from there, whichever Kirk is going to translate.
Okay. At the end of times, several years, the end of the times refers to the terminus of
Terminus.
of an unspecified period of time. Ibn Ezra suggests that years modifies the indefinite in times. Thus, at the end of the times, as in several years, approximately 14 years after his defeat of Ptolemy,
Ptolemy.
Ptolemy the Fourth.
Hmm.
Antiochus the Third felt the time
Opportune.
opportune, oh my goodness, of a new campaign against southern Syria and Egypt. By this time, Ptolemy the Fourth had died, leaving the throne to his infant son, Ptolemy the Fourth. Ptolemy
Epiphanes.
the Fifth.
Yeah, Ptolemy the Fifth, Epiphanes.
The country was being ruled in the king's name by regents.
Yes. So that often happened. That's why ancient, as we spoke about this before, ancient history is very difficult because in history, it's not really history unless you have a year to put it next to. So ancient history is very difficult because ancient kingdoms were not precise. Like they called it the rule of Ptolemy the Fifth, but the kid was playing with toys while everybody else was doing all the political decisions. So I mean, although he became a ruler, of course, but the idea is that we're not talking about like we're used to in modern days. Somebody's a ruler if they're ruling, not if they're not ruling, not if they're incapacitated. If someone was incapacitated but still ruling, they were still in their monarchy, even if somebody else was doing all the hard work. So that's very common in ancient histories, and that's why I urge people to study the Medrash Seder Olam if you want to know real history as far as dating goes, because across the board you find even in the cases of some Jewish kings, it says that they ruled so and so many years, but they didn't actually rule every year that they ruled. Okay, so
No, we get that, Rabbi. You don't have to worry.
oh, okay.
We've just been through 4 years of that.
Yeah.
There you go. Excellent. Okay, now the commentary on verse 14. Okay, if you could continue.
Many will rise up. Antiochus the Third at this time concluded alliance with other kings, notably his uneasy alliance with Philip the Fourth,
The fifth.
excuse me, the fifth of Macedonium.
Macedonia.
Macedonium.
Where the actual Greek area was ruled by the Philips, and the Syrian was by the Antiochuses, and the Egyptians by the Ptolemaic leaders.
The sons of the lawless men of your people will exalt themselves to establish a vision, to interpret the new known vision of the prophets, Malbim, or to pretend to have had divine prophetic inspiration themselves. That's the Mayanin Ha Yeshua 11:4, Mitzidos. The Jews having, you want me to continue?
Well, my name Yeshua, as I mentioned previously, that is the work by Abarbanel on that discusses Daniel in detail. So, okay, the Jews.
The Jews, having suffered greatly under the oppressive rule of the later Ptolemies, pretended that divine prophecy had foretold the demise of the I cannot say that,
Ptolemaic, yes.
dynasty at this time. When this failed to take place, they were dealt with as revolutionaries and killed. The authorities naturally saw them as part of the revolutionary movement against Ptolemy the Fifth.
As you recall, the Torah has a capital punishment for people who pretend to prophesy. So the question is, was that the reason that they died? Is because they were, it was decreed by heaven because of their pretending to be prophets. That group, we're not getting into details here, but there is a quote from Josephus. Now, Josephus is only quasi reliable. He had again, this is a big problem in ancient history books. Sometimes the demands of a monarchy would come before the needs of truth. So in Josephus, we sometimes find certain compromises that we really look, for example, maybe a random comment in a Talmud more than we look for to Josephus for an actual accurate quotation. Yes, you had a question?
Yeah, this is a halachic question, and I've been pondering on it myself, and it's actually quite interesting to ask. Hope you don't mind this, but yeah,
Okay.
besides all the other nations, question is,
Mhm.
what, who, and which person or forefather are the Americans actually descended from? Likewise, the Germans and all those Arabs.
Well, I mean, every country comes from somewhere. Uh, the Arabs are several different uh, tribes that group together. So you have people. Some people are from the line of Abraham. Some people are not. Abraham's descendants are not the only Arabs. There are many Arabs who came from other families. But that's more involved in a little uh, off
Yeah,
topic. So perhaps
because I
we'll
thought the
discuss that later.
Midrash discussed about that
Well,
situation,
yeah, but
whether or not which forefather the Americans are descended from.
okay.
Maybe.
Well, America is a derivative of European countries, and European countries are derivative of Middle Eastern countries. So, uh, but one of the biggest groups of settlers in the United States were Germans, actually. Another group was
Not like Nazis, right?
right, no,
Not anti-Semites.
correct.
Good. I hope there were good people who cared about Jews.
Yes.
Yes.
But if you were to look at a map of where did Germans settle in the United States, you'll see probably majority of the United States had German colonies. So it's fascinating, even though of course it was colonized initially by the British. But
It's
when
amazing.
right when America became open, a lot of people from Germany came here.
Mhm.
Yeah. So And other aspects of your questions we could deal with when we're on a closer topic to that. Let's get back to this. It's again the book of Daniel is on purpose complicated, so I don't want to get too off topic and distract ourselves. Let's continue with the Art Scroll commentary on this verse. Teresa?
The historical detail, unlike the rest of this chapter, cannot be corroborated.
Corroborated.
Corroborated from any other source. This is not surprising, since such a pseudo-prophetic movement would, at most, deserve only a fleeting mention in the discussion of world policies of those politics of those days. Given the sporadic nature of the information available to us from this period of history, it would be surprising if more mention of it were found. The information, therefore, rests on the merits of the interpretations of this verse, which is rather clear. Rambam saw this phrase as a strong allusion to the founder of Christianity as follows. Also about Yeshua of Nazareth, who imagined himself to be the Messiah and was put to death by the court. It has already been prophesied by Daniel, as is written, and the sons of the lawless men of their people will exalt themselves to establish a vision, but they will stumble. For is there a greater stumbling block than this? All the prophets foretold that the Messiah will redeem the Jews, help them, gather in the exiles, and support their observance of the commandments. But he caused Jewry to be put to a sword, to have their remnants scattered, to be degraded, changed the Torah, and misled most of the world to serve a God other than Hashem. But the thoughts of the Creator of the world are unfathomable to humans. That's Rambam Hilkos Malakim 11:4. This passage, cited only in part, is missing in recent editions. See Parados or Shapshi Frankel editions.
Yeah, it's in areas controlled by in certain Christian countries, Rambam's manuscripts were edited to take this out.
Mm-hmm. Which contained it as found in ancient manuscripts. See also Rambam's
Igeris Teman.
Legeris Timon. The same interpretations is held by Rabbi Sadadin Goam, the Goan. Quoted in Miglos Migela, page 98, Ibn Ezra, Persha Haskazar, and perhaps Rashi. Our versions are extremely ambiguous and have no doubt been tampered with by censors.
So it's part of the reason God divided Jews in between Ashkenaz and Sephardic lands is to make sure that the censors of one land were not affecting the manuscripts held in another land. So sometimes you have to look to the north to find critiques of Islam, and you have to look to the Ashkenazim, and then you have to look to the southeastern Sephardic lands to find a criticism of Christianity, as far as the manuscripts held in these lands, because there was editing, and again, it not only history was, but even religion itself. The religious texts were freedom of religion is that we're used to in America is not a natural concept in world history. Okay, so the next paragraph is a conclusion of this chapter 4, verse 14 in the article commentary. If Teresa, can you continue another paragraph? Yes, that's it. Paragraph. Right word.
Although this verse belongs to the Greek era, according to Rabbi Sa'adea and Rashi, that does not preclude the above interpretation from the Megillah already
Megillah, yeah.
touches upon this apparent contradiction. It is likely that the Nazarene apostate had its roots in the Hasmonean era. The Talmud tells about Yeshua, a disciple of Yahshua ben Akat,
Ben Parachia.
Kakia,
Yeah.
in the Hasmonean era, in the Sanhedrin 107b, cf.
Hesronos
Hasrono,
Hashas.
yes, and Tophus in Shabbos 104b raises this possibility. This historical probability was used many times by rabbis in their disputes with Christians. See in Atzar HaVik
Yeah, so the in the a gray area in history where the Romans were replacing the Greeks. So there was a carryover movement that eventually turned itself into the foundation of Christianity. So it's a debate among scholars. Is the uh, Talmudic Jesus the same as the one from 1900 years ago, or is it a different one? Clearly, according to Rambam and other rabbis too, uh, the Gemara is talking about the Christian Jesus. Okay, so now according to Rabbi Tovia Singer, the Talmud is accurate, but he thinks that the dates in the Talmud may have been changed by censors. So therefore, it was not a disciple of Rabbi Shua ben Parachia, but it was a different scholar later in the days of right before the destruction. If it was Yeshua ben Parachia, then it's possible that there was a Jesus in the days of Yeshua ben Parachia, and then he was written into the narrative by, for example, the Apostle Paul. He just took this name from a previous story to write his fictional work. So when people are making stuff up, if they're making stuff up in the name of God, any deception is possible. So that's the problem. And on top of that, the Christian censors from the Roman era, like hundreds of years later in the Holy Roman Empire, they were deleting stuff from the Talmud. So it made a whole mess of the things. And then, of course, it makes it hard to discuss it straight. If just they left the Talmud alone, for example, according to the opinion of Rabbi Singer, then we would have had a historic text describing it in perfect clarity. But either way, we're talking about clear foundations of the Torah that the New Testament unfortunately goes against, and it's not possible that it's from God. So that's the reality of it. It doesn't really, I mean, the historical dating is not so important as the fact that the Tanakh is proven facts, and the New Testament doesn't meet the test of being possibly from God. And it's really sad when sometimes when people who should know better, there's scholars, they try to limit themselves according to what they were trained as a Christian without looking at actual facts. If you just look at the actual facts of that time in history, it becomes impossible to assume that the New Testament has any connection to the Holy Tanakh. Okay. Any questions or comments? Okay, so let's go on to verse 15 in the Hebrew. Yeah, I'll read 15 through 19 in the Hebrew. V'yovo melech hatzafon v'yishpoch solola l'chad ir mivtzaros uzroos hanegev u'yamdu v'am mivcharav v'en koach la'amod v'yas haba elav kirtzono v'en omed lefanav v'yamod v'eretz hatzavi v'chala v'yado v'yasem panav lavo b'sokef kol malchuso v'sharim imo v'asa uvas hanashim Yiten lo lahashchisa, lo sa'amod v'lo lo sihia. V'yasem panav le'im v'lachad rabim v'hishpis katzin charpaso, lo bilti charpaso yashiv lo, v'yashev panav l'ma'uzei artso, v'nichshal v'nafal v'lo yimatzeh. Okay, Ernestine, please translate 15 through 19.
King of the north will come and pour out a mount and conquer a fortified city. The arms of the south will not hold out. His chosen warriors will have no strength to withstand it. The invader will then do to the southern king as he pleases, and none will stand in his way. He will also stand in the coveted land with annihilation in his hand. He will set his face to penetrate the strength of the southern king's whole kingdom, and the upright ones who are with him, and he will succeed. He will give over to him the daughter among women to destroy her, but it will not succeed, and she will not be his. Then he will turn his attention toward idols, and he will conquer many. But the commander will cause his insolence to cease. For his insolence alone he will punish him. Then he will direct himself toward the strongholds of his homeland, and he will stumble and fall and not be found.
Okay, so on verse 17, if you could do the commentary, Teresa, just the small paragraph and the daughter among women.
And the daughter among women, Israel, according to Rashi, according to Malbim, is referred to Cleopatra, daughter of Antiochus III, as in the daughter of one of his women.
Interesting. So it's fascinating that, but it's again we're seeing where the chapter is starting to no longer be clearly about one king and one point in history and one protagonist in this case. Either the nation of Israel or Cleopatra are two different topics. So it's fascinating this verse can have such a dichotomy of meaning. Okay. All right. So So this is the first half of the last reading in this book. I think I would like to press on. Is everyone okay with that? Can we press on? I'd like to.
Yeah, that
Uh,
sounds good.
you're good with it? Okay, good. All right. So now the last verses in chapter 11 are different. Okay. So now it's going to be um
Oh, it's also going to be about how the Babylonian
no, we haven't talked about the Babylonians for a chapter and a half.
Oh, because I thought the Babylonians today were replaced by a different government.
Well, they were already replaced. The Babylonians were already replaced by the Persians, and then the Persians were replaced by the Greeks.
And then then scary times, new evil governments and countries, not countries, evil governments came and kicked out all the Jews from Babylonia. Like, why?
Yeah, well, one
Idiots.
one horror at a time. Okay, that's why they make sequels to horror movies. You can't fit it all on the screen at all in one session. But I mean, there's been history has been in some cases difficult. But
I'm gonna panic like Ezekiel Jones and scream. Ah!
okay, well, rather than explaining who that is, let's continue. No, it's all right. Let's just stay on focused. Even if we're talking about Ezekiel the prophet, that's a different book. Okay.
Yeah, we have to be brave like Donald Trump and make Israel great again.
Well, let's make this class great again, okay? Just stay on topic.
Yes, yes.
Thank you, sir.
It's more like a homeschool.
Okay.
Come on, am I right?
Uh, Hashem loves you.
Okay, let's get back on topic already.
Okay. Okay. Well, okay, I guess I love you too. Now cut it out.
Oh my God.
Okay. Thank you. All right.
Back with what we were off to.
Yes. Thank you, sir. Okay, so starting in verse 20 in the blue edition of the Art Scroll, this will be on page 130. Vaman al kano ma'avir noges heder malchus v'yamim achadim yishaver lo va'apim v'lo v'milchama. Vamad al kano nivze lo nasnu alav hod malchus uva v'shalva v'chazik malchus b'chalaklakos uzros shetef yishaftu milfanav yishaveru v'gam nagid beris. Umin his Chaberus Elav Yasa Mirma Vasa Vatsam Bimat Goy. Vishavo Vishmane Medina Yavo Vasa Asher Lo Asu Avosav Vavos Avosav Biza Vishalal Verchush Lahem Yivzor Vamiv Tsarim Chashev Machshavosov Vades. Please translate verses 20 through 24. Ernestine.
There will arise in his place one whose glory of kingship is the overthrow of the oppressor. Yet in a few years it will be broken, but neither through an enemy's wrath nor through war. Then in its place will stand a contemptible one, upon whom they did not confer the glory of kingship. He will come in peace, attaining kingship through treachery. The powers that had swept away others will themselves be swept away before him and will be broken, as well as the prince of the covenant. Through alliance with him, he will act with deceit, and he will come up and gain power with a small nation. He will come in peace into the richest part of the province will he come, and he will do what his fathers and forefathers did not do. Among
And
his
right.
allies, he will distribute booty, spoils, and wealth, and he will devise his plans against their fortresses until the time.
Okay, so in the commentary on verse 21, the paragraph attaining kingship through treachery. Can you translate that, Teresa?
Okay, let me find it.
Page 131.
Obtaining kingship through treachery. Antiochus IV, at the time of his brother's death, was serving as the general of the Roman forces at Athens.
You
He
see,
had,
so look, this is the confusing thing. We have the Grecian Empire ruling in the Middle East, and Athens, the center of what we know as Greece now, uh, as being ruled by Romans. So you see the transition from the Greek times to the Roman times was not so easy. It was a little bit messy. It's like a messy point in history. Uh, like for example, the transfer um between Babylon and Media Persia. So that was pretty simple. You know, they after just a couple battles and it was over. Persia had a complete dominance over the entire Babylonian map. But the Roman battles with the ancient Greeks is an entirely different thing. So just keep that in mind. This opens up, of course, for our purposes, we need to know this, the possibility we may be talking about the Greeks, we may be talking about the Romans, and it may still be in the same century in the ancient world. So we're not necessarily in a different era yet, but we could be. This is a complication because again, these three chapters, especially, this is the most uh, possible to have uh, a hidden meaning. Okay, so but let's continue in the commentary on this verse.
he had been
This
away from Syria for most of his adult life, having been a hostage in Rome from the time of his father's defeat at Magnelis.
magnesia, as in milk of magnesia, which they probably needed after all these wars.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Thus he could not count on native Syrian uh, forces to support him, but he was able to convince the king of Pergamum, the,
Pergamum.
the city near the Dardanelles, to lead him to lend him the support of his troops.
So Dardanelles, however it's pronounced. Okay, that's the area, the peninsula where the Black Sea meets the Mediterranean Sea, like in modern Turkey. Okay, so it's right by Greece. So in the old days, you know, the Greek Empire controlled it. And then, for example, the city of Troy, you know, the Trojan horse. So that is actually in what is modern Greece, modern Turkey. So it was a real city, and it was not on the side of the Greeks. But so that was on in the Aegean Sea in Asia Minor. So if you get familiar with that area, it's good to study it if you're going to get into the Greek Empire. But again, what part is now Greek Empire? What part is now the Roman Empire? People called Antiochus were now in the Roman Empire, so it's getting a bit confusing if we go into this too much, which is why I'm trying to stay out of the commentaries as much as possible. No offense, you know, it's really cool if you can read the whole book and you have it in front of you. If you don't have the whole book in front of you, so reading about the ancient history, which is, you know, not always the easiest thing you know, to put down, it can be complicated. All right, so I don't just want this to be a history lesson. That's a nice addition the main thing is we learn what the prophecy is meaning and possible interpretations of the prophecy, just to get an idea. And maybe this or that is bigger than knowing, oh, it's definitely this, and this, which you could read on your own. Okay. All right. So let's skip down. So just a little bit about Cleopatra, because people have heard about her. So in verse 22, the paragraph, as well as the Prince of the Covenant.
Wow, so she's been really popular and known in every single website for the internet.
Well, not just there, but it's in it's it's just a famous story that's repeated in Western civilization. Whenever you have like movies or books and fiction, so Cleopatra's been retold so many times, nobody has an idea who the real person was. So it's nice to see actual discussion of her as a real person.
Okay.
Okay, but again, to know that she was Greek, not Egyptian. That's very interesting. Okay,
Mm,
so let's if you got there, you're in chapter 11, verse 22 in Daniel,
yeah.
in the Art Scroll Blue Edition, second paragraph of verse 22 commentary.
As well as the Prince of the Covenant. This refers to Ptolemy,
Ptolemy,
Ptolemy the
six.
sixth, the fourth
Philometor.
Philometor, the
Yeah,
son.
that's why he was called Ptolemy the sixth. That was easier
Yeah,
than his actual
yeah.
name. No
Um,
offense. I mean, okay, I'm sorry. Then, for all I know, there's probably some Ben Noach named Philometer is going to call me up and say, "Well, why are you dissing my name, man?" Yeah.
the son of Antiochus, sister Cleopatra, verse see verse 17, who was bound by a peace agreement with him. Uh, Ptolemy the fifth had died, and Cleopatra ruled on behalf of her minor sons. Antiochus used his kinship with the queen regent, his sister, verse 17, to gain entry to Egypt. Once in the country, he used the opportunity to plunder and pillage, as told in verses 23 through 24. Another version claims that Antiochus did not attempt any action against Egypt during Cleopatra's regency, but when she died and the actual rule passed into the hands of two advisors, Eleucus and Lancius, Antiochus the fourth claimed and argued before the Roman Senate that the Egyptians were massing troops on the border of Israel in preparation for a massive attack. The Romans, busy with a war in Macedonia, did not intervene. Antiochus seized the opportunity and struck at Egypt. Rashi understands here to refer to the Hashmonean kings who had concluded an alliance with the Romans. The Romans broke their pact after 26 years, as related in Avodah Zorah 8b-ff.
Yeah. So now it's going to continue to talk about Cleopatra, but you could read about it yourself. So it's fascinating that these famous people are mixed in here, and but let's continue in the actual prophet days of Daniel. So we read up to verse 24. Let's read. Let's see. Okay, I'll read 25 through 28 now. V'yo'er kocho levavo al melech hanegev b'chayil gadol u'melech hanegev yisgaret למלחמה בחיל גדול ועצום עד מאוד, ולא יעמוד כי יחשבו עליו מחשבות. ואוכלי פס בגו, ישברוהו, וחילו ישטוף, ונפלו חללים רבים. ושניהם המלאכים לבבם במרב על שולחן אחד, כזב ידברו, ולא יצלח, כי עוד קץ למועד. וישוב ארצו ברכוש גדול, ולבבו על בריס קודש ועשה ושב לארצו. Okay, Ernestine, please translate 25 through 28.
He will stir up his strength and his heart against the king of the south with a great army. The king of the south will confront him in war with an exceedingly great and powerful army, but he will not withstand, for they will devise plans against him. For those who eat of his food will break him. He will then sweep away his army, and many slain will fall. As for the two kings, their hearts will be to do harm. At one table they conspire deceitfully, but it will not succeed, for there is yet an end for the appointed time. He will return to his land with great wealth, with his heart opposed to the holy covenant. Having succeeded, he will return to his land.
I hope Israel isn't doomed.
Israel's never doomed, don't worry. God promised in several places that Israel is eternally protected. Not only eternally protected, but Israel will be exonerated and never shamed for eternity. Isaiah chapter 45. Yeah. So, okay, so in the commentary on verse 28, with his heart opposed to the Holy Covenant, can you read that, Teresa?
Yes, let me find it. Oh, with his heart opposed to the Holy Covenant, as in the Jewish nation, which is identified with this religion, the Holy Covenant with God.
Yeah,
Before
so let's pause there. So Holy Covenant in this case, Artwell is saying let's refer this as a euphemism for the Jewish people. Now, Artwell doesn't immediately give a source on this mini paragraph here, but usually when they don't give a source, they're either quoting Rashi, Mitsudos, or Radak. You understand? So a unnamed source is usually a source. I could look it up, but I trust our school to not make stuff up here. Okay. Right. So that's the key facts to know about this, that we're not talking about a covenant, but the nation that's dedicated to the covenant. Again, the definition of the nation, the Jewish nation, to the Holy Roman Empire is that they refuse to accept Christianity, right? So therefore they became synonymous with the Holy Covenant, and the fact that they're called the Holy Covenant here means that maybe we're now no longer talking about the Greeks. Now we're already talking about the Romans. Okay. So now let's go to the next group of verses. Okay. Okay, I'll read 29 through 31. Lamoid yashuv uva v'negev v'lo tzihiyach harishona ha'acharona. Vo tziyim kitim v'nich'a v'shav v'zoam al bris kodesh v'asa v'shav v'yavein al ozvei bris kodesh. Uzroim menu yamodu v'chilu hamikdash hamaoz v'siru hatamid v'nasnu hashikutz shomem. Umarshie Baris Yachanif Bachalakos Va'am Yodei Elohav Yachaziku Vasu. Please translate 29 through 32.
At a set time, he will come once again to the south, but he will not be as successful as the first time, nor as the last time. Ships of Kittim will come against the south, and he will be weakened. He will then return. Then he will be upset at the Holy Covenant and act accordingly. Then he will return and contemplate those who have forsaken the covenant of sanctity. Arms will arise from him and will profane the fortified sanctuary. They will abolish the daily offering and will install the mute abomination.
One more verse.
He will gleefully flatter those who corrupt the covenant, but the people who know their God will preserve and accomplish.
Okay, so I want to juxtapose. If you look in the last word in the verse 31, talking about the phrase Hashikut Meshomem, the descriptor Meshomem, the mute abomination. So if you've already read through the book of Daniel, and we did quote it once, at least once previously in an earlier chapter, but in next chapter, chapter 12, we also have a discussion of a mute abomination, but it uses a different Hebrew phrase for that. In verse 11 of chapter 12, V'lasei shikut shomem. Okay, there it's shikut shomem. So the descriptor of shomem instead of meshomem. So what's the difference here? So in chapter 11, first of all, shomem has the vav. The vav is missing from chapter 12, shomem. And then the letter mem, which is sometimes it's a reductive quality to if you put it right before a word sometimes. Okay, so first of all, I previously explained Shikut Shomem in chapter 12, referring to the Islamic buildings on the Temple Mount. It's the reason it's missing a vav, according to my explanation previously, but I didn't say this part until we reached this word here, is because here in chapter 11 there's a vav when it's talking about the Greek idolatry, because that was actual idols. Greek pantheon is idols. But here, by Muslims, they don't worship idols. It's just that what they're doing on the Temple Mount is keeping God's holy temple from being rebuilt. So that's bad. But it's not this. It's not a complete abomination. At least in their own way, they're trying to serve the same God as Israel's trying to serve. You understand? If you ignore your parent in every way, but to abandon them and get different parents, so it's still ignoring the parent in every way. You understand? So yes, you didn't go to the full step of disenfranchising yourself from the family, but you're still not letting God's way happen, by what you're doing. So, but over here, the vav is included in shomem because it's a complete abomination in the time of the Greeks when they they interrupted the daily offering and installed an idol. And of course, the reaction was the Hanukkah story with the Maccabees. So now, those of you familiar with Pirkei Avos, Ethics of the Fathers, probably the most famous Talmudic tractate. So Shimon HaTzadik, right in the first chapter, he is actually the forefather of the Hashmonaim, the Maccabees. It's very fascinating. So if you just for an interesting little side note there. Okay, so here in verse 32, chapter 11, he will glibly flatter those who corrupt the covenant. So, covenants. Okay, so the covenant here is with a capital C. So that's according to those who say we're talking about the covenant, the Torah. But according to those who say they were still talking political discussions of different kings from the Greeks or the Romans. So therefore, so this is discussed further in the art scroll, not at first, but later on in verse 32. Teresa, this is on page 136. Okay, so the paragraph starting since this covenant. Can you read from there?
Since this covenant was made with the great ones, no doubt Agrippa II was among them. The dictatory, derogatory term, the
corrupted, yeah,
of the covenant surely then applies to him also. From Sota 41a, one gets the impression that Agrippa was one who adhered to the Torah. This is an expressed opinion of Rashbam in Peshakim 107b. According to this interpretation, one must assume that the references in the Talmud refers only to Agrippa I, the elder, Herod's grandson and father of Agrippa II. In Yoshapon, chapter 63, we find Agrippa II painted in very dark colors.
Okay, so, but in other words, if you're only familiar with the writings of Josephus, you may not have a good opinion of Agrippa II, but he had good things about him, apparently, according to this alternative theory here we mentioned from Art Scroll. Quoting Sota 41a and Rashbam on Pesachim 107b. Okay, please continue in this on this verse about the people.
But the people who know their God, as in the righteous Jews, will persevere with the Torah and the fear of God. Rashi translates will hold on as into the Torah.
Okay. And the first sentence of the commentary to verse, well, we didn't do 33 yet in the Hebrew, so let's do verse 33 in the Hebrew. Okay. Let's see how many reading ahead. Okay, I'll do verse 30. Let me just read verse 33 by itself. Because it's possible that verse 34 is a break, even though Art Scroll puts 33 and 34 and 35 in one paragraph. Again, we're in a chapter which on purpose Daniel has been told to try to make it hidden. So putting the conjunction there maybe like you know, in other words, of I wouldn't suggest in any other context, but something like an attempt to hide it. Normally we call the Torah MS, the Torah of truth, and of course it is compared to any other text in human history. There's no truth like the Torah. As the sages of the Talmud say, Ein Am Yisrael Torah. But here again, we have a special mandate in these three chapters of a special need and imperative to make a secret of some of the meanings of these prophecies. So it's possible that a vav is not the continuation of a paragraph; it could be the start of a new paragraph, and we find this in the five books of Moses, that the word "and" is often the beginning of a paragraph. But let's just read verse 33 by itself, and then we'll continue afterwards. Verse 33: Maskili am yavinu larabim v'nikashlu b'cherev v'lehava bishvi uviviza yamim. Okay, Ernestine, please translate verse 33.
Wise men among the people will give understanding to the multitude. They will stumble by the sword and by the flame, through captivity and through plunder for years.
Okay, so Teresa, could you please read the commentary on verse 33?
Wise men among the people, as in the sages of every generation, like the family of Rashi, family of Rabbi Yehuda the prince. Alternatively, wise men refers to Rabbi Yaakman ben Zakkai, who interceded successfully with
Vespasian
to spare Yarnay and its sages, as related in Glitton 56b.
That right before the destruction of Jerusalem by the Romans. At the time, Rabbi Yochanan escaped from the siege on Jerusalem and requested with Vespasian.
Mm-hmm.
Please continue.
Will give understanding to the multitudes. They will preach the Torah to the people and exhort them to adhere to it. They will make it clear to the people that though the temple is desolate, the Torah has not lost its meaning. They will also strengthen the hope and resolution of the Jewish people in this dark hour. Rashi. They will stumble by the sword. Their steadfast adhesion of the Torah caused them to be martyred during the long and bitter exile. Malbim finds in this a reference to the 10 famous Tannaim, the Midrashic sages, who were martyred by the Romans during the period of the destruction of the temple and the persecution that followed it during the reign of Hadrian. One can interpret great ones, as in 927, as referring to people such as Rabbi Akiva, who supported Bar Kokhba.
Yeah, and he was tortured to death by the Romans.
Yes.
Okay, so therefore now, so we're clearly talking about Roman times, according to these interpretations. Okay, so again, it's difficult. Again, with if you're about King Agrippa, there was more than one King Agrippa. So we in the start of the chapter, we're often talking about the Maccabee era. Now we're talking about the Roman era. All right. So let's continue. Now, starting with verse 34 until verse 39, it's possible to look at it as contemporary times, referring to the 19th and the 20th century. Okay. All right. So let's read. I'm going to read 34 through 39. And then after that, we'll look at the time. We may pause after this. As you recall last week, I said through verse 39 would be the middle section of this of the three parts of this chapter. Okay, but the key here is that so the reason you could connect the next few verses to this chapter is that by my alternative explanation, referring to modern times, the reason is because it's like reminiscent of those days in the Roman times. But otherwise, the article is going to give you the alternative if you're going according to Greek or Roman times. Talking about Constantine and even going back to discuss about Cleopatra and stuff. Okay, but so I'll give you my alternative interpretation of these verses after we get the translation. So let me first say the Hebrew, verse 34 in Daniel 11. V'kashlam ye'azru ezer mat v'nilvu alehem rabim laklakos umin hamaskilin ikashlu birtsof behem levarer labin ad ace kates ki od lamoed vasech ratzono hamelach vis romem vis gadel al kol el val el elim yidaber niflaos vitzliach ad kala za'am ki necheratza ne'esasa val elhei avosav lo yavin val chemdas nashim val kol eloha lo yavin ki al kol yisgadol v'lelohach ma'uzim al kano yichabed v'leloha asher lo yida'uhu avosav yichabed b'zahav v'chesed v'evan yikara v'chamudos v'asa l'mivtzrei ma'uzim im eloha nechar asher yakir yarbe chavod v'him shilam barabim v'adama yichalek b'mechir. Okay, Ernestine, please translate. That's 34 through 39. You're muted, Ernestine. Could you please unmute and then?
I'm sorry.
No
Okay.
problem.
But when they stumble, they will be helped with a little help. For many will come to their aid through glibness. Some of the wise men will stumble in clarifying these words and in elucidating and interpreting when the time of the end will be, for it is not yet the designated time.
So you see, these.
Oh.
If you could pause, Ernestine. So these two verses, you have to kind of ignore it to continue the Art Scrolls narration in the commentary. Yeah, you know what I'm saying? You just like put them in parentheses. Or we're transitioning to a different period in history and a period towards the end of days. That's why we're talking about the end of days. So that's why I wanted to give you my alternative interpretation and not focus on the article commentary for these verses. Okay, let's continue. Verse 36, Ernestine.
The king will do as he pleases, and he will glorify and exalt himself over every god, and he will utter fantastic things against the God of the mighty. Yet he will succeed until God's fury is terminated. For that which was decreed will have been executed. He will not give consideration to the God of Israel's ancestors, nor to the desirable among women, nor will he give consideration to any God, for he will aggrandise himself above everything. But he will honor the God of the fortresses when in his place, and he will honor a God whom his ancestors did not know, with gold, with silver, with precious stones, and with desirable objects. And he will build strong fortresses in honor of a strange God. He will accord great honor to whomever he acknowledges. He will empower them over the multitude, and he will apportion land at a price.
Okay, so this could be any of more than one person in history. There are several arrogant psychos in history who ruled countries, but mostly we're talking about either a Roman or I think we're starting to talk about the leader of the Nazis. Okay, so the linchpin. My interpretation is based on verses 34, 35, but let's first give some of the article translate commentary on later in this reading. So before that, he will not give consideration to the God of Israel's ancestors, whether he was Roman or German. He was descended from Edom, Esav, and Esav's father was Isaac, his grandfather Abraham. So if you look in the art scroll, it says he will not, in verse 37, he will not give consideration to the God of Israel's ancestors. It doesn't actually say that in the Hebrew. This is why I started to doubt this is actually talking about the Romans. Understand? But it could talk about the Romans based on. Okay, so let me try to keep my thoughts together here. And okay, so the God of his forefathers, his ancestors, not Israel's ancestors, but the evil king's ancestors, because remember, the Esau is son of Isaac and grandson of Abraham. So at least two of his forefathers were great people who have the same God as Israel. Okay, so yes, it's the God of Israel's ancestors, but in the context, in the actual Hebrew text, we're not talking about Israel's ancestors. We're talking about the ancestors of the evil king. So whether it's Romans or whether it was the leader of the Nazis, they're both descended from the Edomites, and therefore this verse makes sense in the original prophecy in the Hebrew. But honor the God of the fortresses. So in other words, he's not. You see, there would be a contradiction if you interpret this as being a Roman. I'm starting to see a contradiction here, maybe because the Romans had a pantheon. They wouldn't ignore all gods. They would choose one god and ignore the rest if they wanted to ignore gods. It was very unusual for them to just ignore every god possible. Okay, so it had to be somebody who either trusted in secular military might, like the Nazis, or someone who was an enemy of the Romans, so to speak, the way the Romans would normally do their business. So there's one interpretation by Art School which I like as a possible alternative if you want to talk about it. This is from the ancient world, and you prefer to follow Art Scroll instead of me. Okay, that's okay. But the Art Scroll is it's a, so Art Scroll trying to find the verse. Art Scroll identifies this as Constantine, and okay, here on the bottom, the last paragraph of page 137, the second paragraph on 30 on 37. Okay, so well, do the two little paragraphs on 37.
Okay.
Teresa. Yeah,
He
he
will
will.
not give consideration to the God of Israel's ancestors. The Roman Empire will show no regard for the God of Israel's ancestors, Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov. That's Rashi. Or his Constantine's ancestors. He will show no regard to the pagan gods his ancestors worshipped. May Malak.
Mayne Yeshua. That's again Barbanel and also Malvin.
That's
So now, in the context of the actual Hebrew, I think if it's better to say it's Constantine instead of talking about the Romans. The problem, though, again, if you say Constantine, then why is he having this heavy hand, right? Constantine was a liberator and brought more civilization in a sense, right? Relatively speaking, for a Roman emperor, it's just it's not a question of how many people were killed under a Roman leader. The question is how morally responsible was he for that death, and was it the good guys or the bad guys who he was killing? You know, so Constantine was generally, at least he tried to be into monotheism, but
He tried to what?
he would try to be monotheistic. He tried to be a Christian. It was in his day it was unusual
Yeah,
for the Romans.
but he should have been like a
What?
Jewish king. Like
Well,
could have been as righteous as King David was.
no, he couldn't have been as righteous as King David. He would have to, someone like Marcus Aurelius was relatively very righteous, and he sought out Rabbi Yehuda Nasi to learn Torah from him, so he could.
Yeah, just like his righteous father was.
Right. So
His
but
father was Antonius.
but as far as
Demas.
well, yes, my son's actually very very familiar with this period in history. It's pretty cool. Okay, so but the idea is that Constantine was relatively a force for good in the concept of the cruel Roman Empire. But so on verse 36, if you go higher up on that page, Teresa, and he will let's see. Okay, he will glorify and exalt himself over every god. Could you read that? Verse 36, third paragraph.
1, 2, 3. And he will glorify and exalt himself over every God. He will endeavor to further the Christian religion and to establish it as a state religion. That's Barno, Ibn Ezra, Malbim, without going into detail. And he will utter fantastic things. He will establish principles about the nature of God that will be fantastic, as in unfathomable to the rational mind, passing them off as wonders or mysteries. Malbim. This refers to the dogmas of the Trinity, the virgin birth, the incarnation of God, the transubstantiation. Malvin Ha Yeshua 11:8. These documents received their final formulations and acceptance at the Council of Nicene in 225 CE, which was convoked and influenced by Constantine. The emperor, for political reasons, needed a church united in its beliefs.
So while it was good that he was rejecting idolatry, he was also turning in a sense, setting precedent for the Holy Roman Empire and all of their sins.
Yeah.
So yeah, I wouldn't say Constantine was another Marcus Aurelius, but he was a force for leaving behind the pure idolatry of pagan Romanism. And
he tried his best. I wouldn't blame him, but I'm pretty.
No, there's also stuff to blame.
And a little disappointed that he wasn't like he wasn't like the Mashiach Israel was waiting for.
Right. But remember, Marcus Aurelius is the Roman emperor who was a real spiritual hero. Okay. So,
Spiritually speaking, is righteous,
okay. So now,
right?
correct. Okay. Now I'm going to need if you could hold the questions, to let me do this interpretation of verses 34, 35. Let's see, verses 35, 36. Let's see, no, verses 34, 35. Yes. Okay. So, um, okay. Okay. So now, okay. So 33 says wise men among the people, right? 34 says, uh,
When they stumble.
please. Yeah. Okay, so let me. Okay, I see. I was reading in the Hebrew on Shabbos, so I was trying to find where did I see that. Okay, so let me go to the Hebrew in verse 35. Umina maskilin yikashlu, and it translated, some of the wise men will stumble. Okay, so so now, what is a time of stumbling of the wise men in right before the rise of the Nazis? That was as far as we're talking religion. So that was the establishment of the Reform movement. Now, unlike those who want to say the Reform movement caused the Holocaust, that's not really possible. The Reform movement made it possible for the Holocaust. In a case where,
Why did Hashem allow it?
well, people chose evil. So when that happens, so God gives free will until the time of the end, which we're fast approaching.
And Sutton let him do this?
No, he let Sutton do
Hashem.
this
Why?
because this world is designed to let people choose good or evil. So therefore, if people en masse choose evil, God supports that as far as their free choice, not as what He wants. He said specifically in Tanakh multiple times what is good ethics, what is bad ethics,
After all,
what's
B'nai
good to do,
Israel
what's bad
brought
to do.
this all upon themselves, so they deserve the punishment
Well,
because of their sins.
so I mean, the Reform movement um, was started hundreds of years ago, and there were pogroms in Eastern Europe before the Holocaust. Some in Ukraine, right? So, so these we see that you shouldn't say the Reform movement was the cause of the Holocaust. That's not possible, but it was probably the cause of the massacres before the Holocaust. But the reason why the Holocaust occurred um, hundreds of years after the formation of the Reform movement is because it's not because of the Reform movement. The Holocaust occurred because of the break in the Orthodox movement in Germany. So in Germany in the 19th century, many synagogues and surrounding communities they were Orthodox and they gave it up to become Reformed. So there's a big difference between people who are not learning Torah make a
And that
mistake,
was sin?
a bigger mistake than the Reform movement, because there's a big difference between somebody who doesn't know Torah, misinterprets Torah, teaches his kids, so his grandkids grow up without any idea of what real Torah is. So that's basically what the Reform movement is. You can't blame that for being a utter rebellion against God that causes a Holocaust.
And
So
that was one of the main sins why Hashem allowed the Holocaust to happen?
Well, no, that just set the stage for it. The warning signs were the little pogroms in Europe, and over the course of the European exile before Germany, uh, people don't really keep track of it, but there were a total of at least 3 million Jews over the course of the past few hundred years before the Holocaust were killed.
Then what
So
could have Israel done to prevent it?
well, no, it just turned back from the Reform movement. So the those massacres in Europe, all the pogroms after the Reform movement could be connected to the Reform movement, but it's inappropriate to say the Holocaust was connected to the Reform movement because the Reform movement didn't have the spiritual power to create a Holocaust. However, the rebellion of the Orthodox community in Germany, uh, and if you remember the stories about Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch, he was credited with spiritually saving the Jews of Germany, because he wrote a refutation to this mass join the Reform movement by the Orthodox. So the desire by the Orthodox communities to become Reform was a mass hysteria, and people who were filled with Torah knowledge were turning against God. So this we see the Nazis were indiscriminate against the Jews, whether they were religious or not, whether they were holy or not. You hear stories about individuals among other nations who were cruel to Israel, but they would spare a sage here or there. But the Nazis didn't recognize anyone, no respect whatsoever, and no differentiation between religious and non-religious Jew.
That's crazy.
So, but this corresponds to the fact that people who know the truth turn their backs on the truth, and that you could only say that by the first generation of the Reform movement and the generation of before the rise of Samson Raphael Hirsch, when the Jews of Germany left Orthodoxy, congregation at a time. It wasn't just an individual here or there. Entire congregations became congregations of evil, and how many congregations went? According to one source I read, the estimate was 1,000 Orthodox synagogues turned evil over the course of a few decades in the 19th century. But that is profoundly scary and spiritually speaking, and profoundly worse than the start of the Reform movement. And the result is the Holocaust. So
That's their consequence.
yeah, what's it comparable to? If somebody wanted to put out a fire, but he was grabbing oil instead of water with his jug. Now, if his jug is leaking rapidly, so half the oil is going to leak out, so he's only going to make the fire a little bit worse. But if his jug is fully functional, he picks up the oil and mistakenly and then throws it on the fire. He could destroy the entire building because he put the oil on top of the fire. So having a broken pitcher for such a mistake doesn't create the same tragedy. So we see that the Jews in Europe, they lost 3 million before the Holocaust, and they lost 6 million in the Holocaust. So that's the tuma, the impurity created when righteous people turn their backs on God. Similarly, the evil kings of Judah are credited with surpassing the evil of the kings of the north. Now, the kings of the north, except for two of the kings of the north, for 200 years, they had state-sponsored idolatry. 200 years of rebellion against God. And the three kings of Achaz, Manasseh, and Ammon of Judah were considered more evil against God than they were. Part of it is because they targeted the Torah. Yerovam ben Nebat of the north, Jeroboam, only targeted separating the Jews from the temple by creating idols in the north. But he did not try to destroy the Torah. indeed, the evil king Ahab, who is considered worse than Yerovam ben Nevat, risked his life and his kingdom to defend the honor of the Torah, and he was successful in his war to defend the Torah. So whereas um, Achaz closed down the synagogues, so he could feel like a better worshiper to his idol. And Menashe removed the Torah scrolls from the synagogues, so that Torah will be lost from Israel. And Achaz put an idol outside the temple, and Menashe put an idol inside the temple, and Ammon put an idol from the inside the temple that his father Menashe put, and he moved it all the way into the Holy of Holies. So there was no place possible to pray to that did not have an idol. So those three kings were considered worse than 200 years of evil rulership in the northern kingdom. Similarly, the Orthodox rebellion in the 19th century was more dangerous to the Jewish people than a couple hundred years of the Reform movement before that. But I mean, whether you're talking about 3 million people or 6 million people dying, a lot of people died because of rebellion against the Torah and unfaithfulness. And but we see what why people were crediting Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch as saving the Jews of Europe, because there would have been no Jews in Europe, for example, to come to the United States and establish the big yeshivas here, if not for Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch, who was able to answer the heresy. So, in one of the key things he wrote in High German, which in the university world of Germany in those days, High German was real German, like Ivy League English in America, right? So only if an Ivy Leaguer writes an essay does it have any significance. So Rabbi Hirsch was an expert in even High German, and he was able to defend the Torah in High German, and thereby that stopped the Orthodox community from shattering and continue to fuel the Reform movement. But again, according to that estimate I read, 1,000 synagogues of people whose children were raised to only serve God, in front of their children, they were turning away from God. So it created a spiritual danger that resulted in the Holocaust. Now, to prevent the Holocaust, they would have to reverse course, just like King Hezekiah and Josiah delayed the exile with their repentance for the evil king before them. So the Jews would have had to reverse the going to the reform movement to going away from the Reform movement, but there was no centralized government to be ruled by a king of Judah to enforce any law to make people go away from it. Once people have the allure of freedom to do anything they want, so then on an individual basis, you have to do outreach. You can't expect an entire congregation to repent overnight, so to speak. It could take a long time for that to occur. Again, I spoke about this before, but so again, the Holocaust, I would not say was because of the Reform movement per se, but because of the Orthodox congregations that became Reform in the 19th century, which was not the Reform movement. The Reform movement was, for already existed for hundreds of years before that. So, it's facts are facts. You have to admit the truth so that people can come to the truth. And it's sad that anybody turns away from the Torah, but when people know better and they turn away for, and not only that, but while the Orthodox community was having that problem, the Reform community was making open statements about they want to make their synagogues more like churches. So they started to have organs in Reform synagogues and temples, and at the same time that the Orthodox were becoming Reform. So a real mess. So spiritually speaking, the devastation was already obvious. Except that the level of Torah learning was so profound in Europe, greater than, I mean, probably the greatest yeshivas between the time of the Talmud and then, for like 800 years, the greatest yeshivas rose up in Western Europe, and a lot of them, their disciples came to America to establish yeshivas here, but a lot of them, they were destroyed. But God is merciful. And I remember an agnostic person was asking, this is a bigger question in the 20th century, but in the 20th century, I was asked the question, how could God let the Holocaust happen? So, even in God's greatest rage, and it's called the time of God's fury, but even in the time of God's fury, remember that the majority, 2/3 of the Jewish people survived the Holocaust. So the thing is, if God was furious, so to speak, because he doesn't have human emotions, as I said previously, it's more related to a pre-programmed response, because God just says, if you do this and this and this, that will occur. And then he always looks for an excuse to not give the full measure of the judgment. But when all the exonerating alternatives run out, so unfortunately, uh, God had to he had to be the good parent who disciplined his children, and not trying to be the good friend. You understand? So God did the best he could under the circumstance that we chose. But thank God for God. He has a plan, and we're reaching a threshold of on the threshold of the end of days. And again, according to Tanakh, end of days means the end of days where evil may reign, not the end of the world. It's the start of the good days. So we're reaching a time when people will willingly choose evil. It will become like a foolish idea to choose evil, right? So, and that's, again, according to estimates, we're talking about in less than 5 years, we're going to be transitioning to that. Just closing on a quote. It's fascinating that we're approaching Mashiach time, and a couple interesting quotes. Well, probably the most amazing quote I heard this week was from Donald Trump's appointee to become the Secretary of Defense. So there's a video out there that he was talking about. Uh, it's possible Israel could even have a temple rebuilt on the Temple Mount. He said, "Why not?" I mean, just think about it. That the person was designated to be appointed to Secretary of Defense has that welcoming attitude to a temple, which, according to many rabbis, may be built sometime in the next 5 years. So the timing is so perfect, And of course, the appointee by Donald Trump to become the ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, former governor of Arkansas and presidential candidate 2016. So he is probably more of a religious man than a politician. So, and he totally supports Israel having full control over Judea and Samaria, the heartlands of the Bible. Israel needs to, in order for Mashiach to establish his government as prophesied in Ezekiel, and world peace to come. So it's really amazing that the worst of days are over, and the best of days are on the way. The best of days, again, are hidden, and the best of days are called the end of days, right? Daniel's imperative was to call it the end of days, right? What does Ezekiel call it? Acharis Yamim, right? The final days. But Kates is like a sudden stop, end. It doesn't mean destruction. It means the end of people's freedom to choose that which is spiritually insane. How can you choose this or that evil when God is real and he said, listen to Moses and listen to the Levitic priests and listen to the rabbinical judges. This is a paraphrase of Deuteronomy chapter 17. So when God is real and he says these things, so we know exactly what to do. And we're not going to take a chance. God says repeatedly in the Torah, Lo Sasur Yamino Samo, right? Do not go to the right or left, veer off. And so we're going to have clear spiritual leadership. Nobody could refute, and we'll know exactly what we have to do to prevent cataclysm for all time, world peace forever and ever. And we're on the cusp of it. So let's try to do as many good things as we can to extra merits, so we could soften the judgment time. Because until Mashiach comes, it's possible for troubles to happen, as we saw with October 7th. But we see with the election of Donald Trump, and this is according to Rabbi Mendel Kessin, this is a sign that God is bringing a time of blessing, not destruction.
A time of redemption.
Right. And the most amazing news I heard about Israel this week, I forgot to mention it before to people, is that I heard that Israel already bombed some of Iran's nuclear capability. Previously, they were told not to do that by the Biden administration, but they did it this past week. So basically, I think they're trying to follow Trump's idea of get it done. But thank God. So with the elimination of the threat of nuclear weapons from Iran, it's more than defending Israel, which is Iran likes to call little Satan. America, big Satan. They have so many military units closer to Iran than the land of Israel is. So the American troops were in greater danger, and they were not given the green light to defend themselves against the Iranian regime. And thank God, Hashem sent Israel to defend also the American troops as well. That's a wonderful side effect. And of course, the good Arab countries that are in the Abraham Accords are also benefiting as well. So now when we start to think about the prophecies where Israel will be considered the highest of nations, it's already starting to happen. That we see many generals from Richard Kemp from England. We see former lieutenant colonel, British forces, many Americans, including like John Spencer. So they're all saying Israel is the most moral army there is. They've been treating civilians more humane than any other conflict recorded in the history of city house to house battles. So they're getting a good name even as a secular country. And normally God blesses Israel only if they're religious. So even as a secular country, they're still getting these blessings. So we see the start of the blessings of the end of days is starting to creep in. And remember what Isaiah says, "Be'ita chishena," and it's time I will hasten it. So we have this quickening of more and more signs of the exile ending happening every week. There's, it used to be like once every year there was something major occurred. Then it started to be every month there was something major. Now it's at least once a week there's something that's happening. And sometimes some weeks it's been like every day there's something else. We're getting a little bit closer. So things are happening. And let's just keep trying to do Torah and mitzvos and try to be helpful. We serve God to serve God, but it's okay if it also helps bring Mashiach sooner in a safe way. Again, once we're in the corridor for redemption, there's no more danger. So not just to Israel, but to the world. So, let's keep doing good. Just focus on our ethical and moral choices. Do good in everything we can do, and trust the merciful Father. Remember that the Jewish high holy days doesn't start with Yom Kippur, a day of fasting. It starts with Rosh Hashanah, a day of rejoicing. We rejoice that God is the merciful one in charge of giving us judgment. And then for the rest of the 10 days of repentance, Jews start to repent. So that's fascinating. And so let's at least take up an attitude like Rosh Hashanah. Well, let's rejoice in God, and by inviting Him into our lives more, learning more Torah. If we only learn once a week, maybe we could listen to a short Torah class, like a study of a Mishnah, or something. Like there are 5-minute Torah videos out there nowadays, so it's possible to even learn a few minutes. So we're learning. We're getting closer to the commandment through the book of Joshua. You should learn the Torah day and night. The prophet said the angel said to Joshua, Yoshua. So, Baruch Hashem, we know what to do, and we know God is merciful, and He's going to save us. Remember, in the time of His greatest wrath, He still let 2/3 of the nation He was angry with to survive. So that's amazing, and that's God. And now we're in the time where God promised. Remember, 10 times in Tanakh that God will bring the redemption with mercy. So even if we're not perfectly righteous, so it's possible mercy can occur. We just want to make sure that the tragedies like last year's October 7th don't happen anymore. That we can have mercy without such tribulation. And the rabbis of the past generation have said the key factor to this is increasing Torah study. So let's do the best we can.
Amen.
All right. Any last questions before we call it a session?
No, there's a good class, Rabbi.
All right. Thanks. So we learned that's Daniel chapter 11, verses 5 through 39.
5 through
5 through 39.
All right.
Thank you.
Very good. Thank you,